Despite what this year's playoffs would indicate, overcoming a 3-1 deficit is not a common thing to happen in the NBA. After all, before the Denver Nuggets decided to make a historic run, only 11 teams had managed to make such a comeback. Even less common is for championship contenders to be the ones that let a series go away after being on the brink of closing it out. But that's exactly what happened to the Los Angeles Clippers as their infamous curse continued for the 50th straight year. But perhaps as surprising as the conclusion to their season was the fact that Steve Ballmer decided that the one who should pay for the embarrassment was Doc Rivers, a move that no one was expecting and might completely change the future of the team. Welcome to Courtside. Today we'll talk about whether the coach should have been the one blamed for the Clippers' failure and how things could change for them going forward. Immediately after his team's defeat at the hands of the Nuggets during Game 7, Rivers took the blame and talked about how he hadn't done enough to help the Clippers reach their ultimate goal this season. However, while many fans felt that what he said was correct, it's fair to wonder how much of the blame was really in his hands and whether there were factors that he couldn't control that ultimately had an impact on the way his team played. During the first 4 games of the series, Los Angeles was in control for the better part and was arguably playing the best it ever had throughout the season. And the fact that things started to change from Game 5 had to do with him as much as it did with Michael Malone. The Nuggets coach had already guided his team to a comeback following a 3-1 series deficit just a round earlier. He knew that they had the tools to fight back and possibly win again, and that it was only a matter of making the right moves at the right time to make it all work. So when Denver received a boost from Paul Millsap to help them cut a large deficit in the third quarter of Game 5, they smelled blood in the water and found the energy and confidence to change momentum in their favor. This was in large part because of the reads and changes Malone was doing to their game plan in the middle of the games, and how he had prepared his players to fight until the very last minute. On the other hand, however, Rivers stood still most of the time as he watched his team blow away large leads in 3 consecutive games. Often he failed to counter Malone's moves with some of his own, and when he did, it was usually already too late for it to make a difference. He decided to stick with the players he trusted the most despite them being outplayed most of the time. That had a direct impact on his team's performance as the players were forced to follow a plan that wasn't working while watching their counterparts make different adjustments to come back over and over again. So yes, Rivers was one of the reasons why the Clippers failed to close the series out and allowed the Nuggets to take 3 consecutive games away from them. But still, that's not the whole story to it. As we just mentioned, some of their players were outmatched in most of these games, and their effort was inconsistent at best. But the problem is that those who were having mediocre games were not the role players, but the ones who had been steady contributors during the regular season and were expected to play even better when their team would need it the most. Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, and Montrezl Harrell underperformed for the better part of their final 3 games and hurt the Clippers' chances to make it to the conference finals, either by getting into foul trouble, not playing good defense, or simply not playing well at all. But they were not the only ones to fall victim to the pressure. Kawhi Leonard had been playing excellent during the first 6 games of the series, and Paul George, while still far from playing as was expected from him, was having a much better series than he did in the first round. Therefore, with their season on the line and LeBron James and the Lakers waiting to know their opponent in the conference finals, George and Leonard were expected to come to the rescue and dominate the Nuggets to finally put them away for good. But as we all know, that did not happen. In short, all of the Clippers' best players collapsed as the series got longer, and they deserve as much of the blame for being eliminated as Rivers. Had they played closer to what they're capable of doing, the team could probably have stopped Denver from coming back from double-digit deficits in at least one of the games they lost. And while part of it should be attributed to the adjustments that never came, the truth is that many of the reasons that caused the team's underwhelming performances were out of the control of either Rivers or the players. Following Game 7, everyone from Rivers to the last player that was interviewed talked about how their lack of chemistry had been the main cause for their downfall, and though this could sound like an excuse to some, their play together showed that it was not. From the moment the season started, the team dealt with injuries to most of their best players, which limited their time together as a full unit for all but 11 games. And while the effects of that inconsistency weren't noticed as much during the reg season, it hurt their chances from going deeper in the playoffs. This resulted in players not having clear what their role should be during a close game situation, thus leading to much improvisation on offense and overall disorganization on defense. The lack of clarity produced too many forced shots, stopped the ball from moving, and made them feel frustrated while their opponents were just having fun. But aside from their poor chemistry, many other things influenced their play. The availability of their players continued to be a problem inside the bubble, as a few members of the team had been diagnosed with coronavirus, and others had to miss some time to attend personal or family issues. It wasn't until the second round that their full roster was together, and by that moment, there wasn't time to practice and slowly get back into playing form. They had to do their best in a playoff game without being completely prepared for it. To make things even worse, being inside the bubble represented a mental and emotional challenge for them. Paul George dared to talk about his mental health, but other players were just not looking like they wanted to be there. And of course, this wasn't something that only affected the Clippers, as all teams had to go through the same struggles, but the fact that this added to the problems they already had only made things more difficult for them. But now, taking into consideration that Rivers' coaching was one of the reasons why the Clippers fell against the Nuggets, but also that it was far from the only reason for it, was firing him the best move for the team? Up until this point, Ballmer had been cautious of not intervening in basketball-related decisions if he felt he wasn't knowledgeable enough to make such moves. Therefore, the fact that he decided to let Rivers go came as a surprise to most people, but it's clear he thought the team would be better under a new voice. Whether that will be the case remains to be seen, and while we probably won't have the chance to see what a different coach can make with this roster until 2021, what we can do is take a look back at the impact Doc had within the organization. Rivers became the coach of the team in 2013, making it his third job as a head coach in the league following previous tenures in Boston and Orlando. At the time, it looked like a perfect fit for both parts. The Clippers were coming off their best regular season ever and had a solid core that included Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan, but had also been eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. Rivers, on the other hand, was coming off a successful run with Boston, where he led the team to a championship in 2008 and a finals appearance in 2010. But after the Celtics decided to go all in with the rebuild, the coach was allowed to leave and his rights were traded to Los Angeles. The idea was that his championship experience would help the team turn into a consistent contender and eventually bring a title to a franchise that was often regarded as the worst in the league. However, the results were mixed. During his time with the team, Rivers guided the Clippers to a winning record on 7 straight seasons and 6 playoff appearances, making him by far the most successful coach in the team's history. But despite their success during the regular season and the level of talent they had on the roster, they were unable to make it to the conference finals, blew a 3-1 series lead in 2015 against the Houston Rockets, and were eliminated in the first round on 3 occasions. Still, while he couldn't lead the team to the promised land, his impact goes way beyond his record as a coach. In his first season, the team faced a major challenge following Donald Sterling's controversy, and he took it upon himself to regroup his players, assuming a leadership role as the NBA worked to force Sterling into selling the team. He embraced the team and became one of its most important representatives, helping build a winning culture and also being one of the major reasons why players started to consider the Clippers as a destination in free agency. This was highlighted by the moment when the team acquired George and Leonard, as the former Finals MVP was clear during a free agency interview by saying he wanted to play for them. In short, Rivers was one of the biggest assets for the team over the last 7 years, and perhaps the better move would have been giving him 1 more year before deciding whether to fire him or not. After all, teams that are built through free agency to contend for a championship don't usually reach their full potential until at least their second season. And the teams LeBron James has played for serve as the best example for this. But now, the Clippers will be faced with a huge challenge, replacing a good coach with a better one. If they're able to do it, Ballmer might be able to silence all of his doubters in about a year, but if they don't, the fact that Leonard and George could leave as free agents after next season might become a bigger concern than what most people expected. Overall, the fact that Doc Rivers couldn't guide his team past the second round of the playoffs doesn't make him look good, but still, the decision to fire him before he was able to develop some consistency with his players seems rushed. Because of it, next season may come with even more pressure for a team that will have to adapt to a new system and will be judged based on whether they're able to win a championship or not. The move might end up being exactly what Ballmer is hoping it will be, but until we reach that point, a big question mark may surround the Clippers heading into their next season. But now, do you think the team will become better without Rivers going forward? Which other moves should the Clippers make to improve their chances at a title? Let us know in the comments. We hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. We are Courtside.